Punjab's 30 million people, Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs living in intermingled villages, could not be divided by any line that would not leave significant numbers of each community on the wrong side. Cyril Radcliffe knew this. The British government knew this. They drew the line anyway, announced it on August 17, 1947, and by year's end, approximately 1 million people were dead. The line did not cause conflict between communities that had always been at war. It created conditions for violence between communities that had lived together, imperfectly, but together, for centuries. That distinction is the episode's central argument. Sir Cyril Radcliffe was a distinguished British lawyer, chairman of the English Bar Council, with no experience of India, no knowledge of South Asian languages, and no previous involvement in South Asian affairs. He was appointed chairman of the Boundary Commissions for both Punjab and Bengal in June 1947, and given 73 days to draw the borders of two new nations through territories containing hundreds of millions of people. He worked through the Indian summer without adequate air conditioning, relying on census data, district maps, and testimony from the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League, two parties with directly opposing interests in where the line fell. He left India 5 days after his borders were announced. He never returned. Lord Mountbatten, the last Viceroy of India, appointed in February 1947, accelerated the partition timeline from June 1948 to August 1947, cutting available preparation time from over a year to 5 months. The acceleration was political. Mountbatten and the British government believed that a faster departure would reduce British responsibility for what followed. The specific calculation was wrong in its second premise. The speed of departure directly determined the inadequacy of preparation, the incomplete census data, the under-resourced Boundary Commission, the absent police protection for migrating communities. That produced the scale of the violence. The million dead were not the inevitable price of partition. They were the specific price of a schedule that prioritized British departure over human safety. The specific institutional inadequacy that the accelerated timeline produced is documented in the historical record. The Punjab Boundary Force, the military unit assigned to protect migrating communities, was authorized at 50,000 troops. It received 12,000. Its operational area covered a population migration of approximately 10 million people across a front of approximately 45,000 square kilometers. The mathematical reality, approximately 1 soldier for every 833 migrants, in a territory whose specific geography, road network, and communications infrastructure made coordinated protection essentially impossible. The boundary force was not a failure of execution. It was a consequence of planning that was never adequate to the scale of what was being undertaken. The partition migration of 1947 was the largest forced migration in human history. Approximately 15 million people moved across the Radcliffe Line in the months following partition. Muslims moving from India to Pakistan, Hindus and Sikhs moving from Pakistan to India. The columns of migrants stretched for miles across the Punjab plain, bullock carts, people on foot, whatever possessions could be carried. The specific human consequence was the loss of everything that could not be carried, the land that families had farmed for generations, the houses their grandparents had built, the graves of their ancestors, the specific rooted geography of a life that was not portable. The migration was not voluntary. It was the product of violence, fear, and the specific terror of being on the wrong side of a line. The violence that accompanied the migration was not spontaneous. It was organized, systematic, and conducted by armed groups on all sides, Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh. Entire villages were massacred. Trains carrying refugees were stopped and all passengers killed. Hindu mobs attacking Muslim trains, Muslim mobs attacking Hindu and Sikh trains. Women were specifically targeted, mass rapes, abductions, and the specific violence that communal conflict directs at women as a means of destroying the other community's future. The British government's own estimates, produced after the violence, concluded that approximately 1 million people died. Independent historical analysis suggests the figure may have been higher. The specific historical debate about the number does not change the moral character of what happened. It was a catastrophe that was predictable, was predicted, and happened anyway. The Punjab Award, Radcliffe's border through the Punjab province, produced its most acute consequence in the specific allocation of Gurdaspur district. The district's allocation to India, rather than Pakistan, gave India contiguous access to the princely state of Kashmir, which Radcliffe's line would otherwise have isolated. Pakistan has always contended that the Gurdaspur decision was specifically manipulated, that the district's demographic composition should have allocated it to Pakistan, but that Mountbatten's influence produced a different outcome to give India the Kashmir access it needed for the subsequent conflict. The specific allegation of deliberate manipulation has never been proven, but has never been definitively refuted. What is documented? The Gurdaspur allocation gave India the road access to Kashmir that made the 1947-48 Kashmir War strategically viable. The Bengal Partition, the eastern component of Radcliffe's award, produced its own specific catastrophe, the division of Bengal between West Bengal, India, and East Pakistan, which became Bangladesh in 1971, after another war that killed between 1 and 3 million people. The Bengal Partition divided a culturally unified people, Bengali Hindus and Bengali Muslims, who shared a language, literature, and cultural tradition, along religious lines. It placed the jute-producing agricultural areas in East Pakistan, while the jute processing industrial infrastructure remained in Calcutta, in West Bengal. It created an economically incoherent division that produced the conditions for the poverty, political instability, and military exploitation that made East Pakistan's independence war inevitable. The Bengal Partition produced Bangladesh's founding through a genocide. Kashmir, the princely state whose accession to India, rather than Pakistan, produced the First India-Pakistan War in 1947-48, remains the most dangerous unresolved territorial dispute in the world. The line of control that divides Indian-administered Kashmir from Pakistani-administered Kashmir is not a recognized international border. It is a ceasefire line from 1949 that both sides have maintained, while neither has accepted. India claims the entire former princely state. Pakistan claims the Muslim-majority areas. The Kashmiri people have been the subject of this dispute, not participants in its resolution, for 78 years. The nuclear dimension, India and Pakistan have both tested nuclear weapons. Both maintain nuclear arsenals, and both have explicitly included Kashmir in their nuclear deterrence calculations. The four India-Pakistan wars, 1947-48, 1965, 1971, and the Kargil conflict of 1999 are each directly traceable to the specific territorial and demographic conditions the Radcliffe Line created. The 1947-48 war, the Kashmir accession dispute. The 1965 war, Pakistan's attempt to force a resolution of the Kashmir dispute by military means. The 1971 war, the Bangladesh independence conflict produced by the Bengal Partition's economic and political incoherence. The 1999 Kargil conflict, Pakistani military intrusion into the Indian side of the line of control. 4 wars, 3 nuclear crises, 1 partition line. The specific accumulated military and political cost of the Radcliffe Line, across 78 years, exceeds any calculation of the British departure's speed premium by orders of magnitude. The Punjab that the Radcliffe Line divided is one of the most agriculturally productive landscapes in South Asia, the land of 5 rivers whose specific fertility has sustained civilization for 4,000 years. The Indus Valley Civilization, one of the earliest urban civilizations on Earth, developed in the river systems that the Radcliffe Line now crosses. The specific cities, Lahore, Amritsar, Sialkot, Ludhiana, all within the partition zone, all connected by culture, trade, and the specific intermingled history of a region that had been a unified agricultural and commercial civilization since before recorded history. The partition divided the Punjab's river systems between 2 countries in ways that produced the Indus Waters dispute, a conflict over irrigation water that still generates diplomatic tension and has been called the world's most complex water-sharing arrangement. The Golden Temple in Amritsar, the holiest site in Sikhism, lies on the Indian side of the Radcliffe Line, while Nankana Sahib, the birthplace of Guru Nanak, Sikhism's founder, lies on the Pakistani side. The partition placed the Sikh community's 2 most sacred sites in different countries. The specific Sikh experience of partition is the most acute of the 3 communities. The Sikhs had no state of their own to migrate to, suffered the highest per capita violence of any community in the partition, and found their most sacred geography divided between 2 nations, neither of which was theirs. The Khalistan movement, which produced the most severe political violence in India between 1984 and 1993, was the direct political consequence of the Sikh community's specific partition experience and the unresolved question of Sikh political representation that the partition created. The partition's survivors, now in their 80s and 90s, the last generation with living memory of undivided India, carry a specific testimony that historical documentation cannot fully replicate. The 1947 Partition Archive, based in Berkeley, California, has collected over 10,000 oral testimonies from partition survivors. The testimonies consistently describe the same specific experience: communities where Muslim, Hindu, and Sikh neighbors had coexisted for generations, sharing festivals, attending each other's weddings, borrowing from each other, who within weeks of the partition announcement were killing each other. The testimonies identify the same cause: the announcement of the border, the specific rumor and fear it generated, and the organized armed groups that exploited that fear. The ancient hatred narrative does not survive contact with the testimony of the people who lived through the partition. Cyril Radcliffe burned his papers after completing the partition awards. The specific notes, drafts, and working documents that might have revealed the full reasoning behind his most consequential decisions, including the Gurdaspur allocation, were destroyed by the man who made them. He reportedly said he wanted to leave no record that could be used to reopen the awards. He spent the remainder of his life in England, rarely discussing the partition, and died in 1977. He reportedly never returned to India or Pakistan. The man who made the most consequential cartographic decision in South Asian history destroyed the evidence of how he made it, and spent his remaining decades in silence. The million dead did not have that option. The Radcliffe Line's specific contribution to the Borders Drawn in Bad Faith series is the most intimate demonstration of the series' central argument. Borders drawn without adequate knowledge, without adequate time, and without the consent of the populations they divide produce violence that is not the inevitable expression of ancient hatreds, but the specific manufactured consequence of the border drawing process itself. The partition violence of 1947 was not between people who had always been at war, it was between people who had lived together. The testimony confirms this, until a line announced on August 17 told them they were in different nations, and organized violence exploited the fear that announcement generated. The line made the violence possible. It did not make it inevitable. Human decisions at every stage could have reduced the scale. The decisions made chose speed over safety. 73 days, 1 million dead, 15 million displaced, 4 wars, 3 nuclear crises, the most dangerous nuclear standoff on Earth. One man who burned his papers. The Radcliffe Line is still the border. The line of control in Kashmir is still a ceasefire line from 1949. The nuclear arsenals on both sides are still pointed across it. The series continues next episode with the Berlin Conference of 1884. The night European powers divided Africa without inviting a single African. 14 nations, 1 conference room in Berlin. A continent divided into 54 countries whose borders reflect the colonial negotiating positions of European powers, rather than the geographic, ethnic, or cultural realities of the African societies they divided. Every significant African conflict in 2026 has a direct connection to the borders drawn at that conference. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the story doesn't end here, it evolves. Borders Drawn in Bad Faith continues. 3 more borders, 3 more episodes, 3 more active conflicts, whose origins trace to specific moments when specific people drew specific lines through lands and lives they did not understand. The line is still there. The consequences compound.